the opportunity to present to you their arguments. They're not going to argue with you. Argument is that stage of the proceedings where the attorneys comment on what they believe the evidence has shown in this case. As I mentioned to you in my instructions, the statements of the attorneys during the argument phase of the trial are not evidence. The attorneys will not intentionally misrepresent or misstate the evidence, but as advocates, they may have had a different view than you. Remember, you're the only fact finders in this case. So if you heard or saw something differently from an attorney, rely upon your own individual determination. Sometimes jurors ask during the deliberations, may we have read back a particular attorney's argument, or may we have a PowerPoint or a chart that's presented during argument. Ladies and gentlemen, if it's not in evidence, you don't get it. So please be aware of that. If you want to take notes, by all means, take notes during argument, but recognize that the argument phase simply is not evidence. The people have an opportunity to present an opening argument. The defense, if it wishes, may present its argument. And if the defense presents an argument, the people have a second argument called a closing or rebuttal argument. That is because the people have the burden of proof. After the parties have presented to you their arguments, I'll give you the concluding series of instructions. Thank you. At this time, Mr. Walgren, on behalf of the people, do you wish to present your opening argument?
Please, Your Honor.
You may. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Let me begin by, and I think I extend this from all the parties and everyone involved in this trial, just first thank each and every one of you for your service in this case, for being an extremely, by all accounts, punctual, diligent, and attentive jury. All the parties appreciate it, and all the parties would ask that you just hang on a bit longer while we get through this last phase of the trial. As the court indicated, this is a closing argument, and it gives us an opportunity to go through the evidence that you've heard, to apply that evidence to the law, and to present the case in a final summation. You've heard from, I believe, 49 witnesses. You've been presented with 330-plus exhibits throughout the case, extending weeks, multiple items of evidence, multiple witnesses, and a great deal of evidence to consider. At the end of the day, however, and as I spoke to you about during voir dire, this case will come down to whether or not you believe Conrad Murray acted with gross negligence or criminal negligence in his treatment of Michael Jackson. It'll come down to whether or not you believe he was a substantial factor in Michael Jackson's death. He need not be the only factor. He need not be the only cause. He only need be a substantial factor, which is defined as something more than trivial and more than remote. Ladies and gentlemen, the evidence in this case is overwhelming. The evidence in this case is abundantly clear that Conrad Murray acted with criminal negligence, that Conrad Murray caused the death of Michael Jackson, that Conrad Murray left Prince, Paris, and Blanket without a father. For them, this case doesn't end today or tomorrow or the next day. For Michael's children, this case will go on forever because they do not have a father. They do not have a father because of the actions of Conrad Murray. Now, what this is fundamentally about is trust. Trust between a doctor and a patient. We've heard a great deal about the doctor-patient relationship, this hallowed relationship, this special, historic relationship where a patient relies on a doctor's best medical judgment, where a doctor is assumed and is entrusted to provide the best medical care to do no harm to his patient. and that a doctor will use that best medical judgment and provide that best medical care regardless of the requests of the patient. Because a doctor has a legal duty, an ethical duty, to do no harm. A doctor has a duty to his patient. And from each and every doctor that you heard from in this trial, whether called by the people or the defense, you heard that if a request was made to provide medical treatment that could cause harm, that doctor in the end would have to say no and walk away. The doctor is the decision maker. The doctor is the one entrusted with the medical knowledge. The doctor is the one in the relationship who at the end of the day makes the decision as to what is proper medical care and what is in the well-being of the patient. You've heard from many doctors in this case who told you that if they were presented with this situation, they would absolutely say no and walk away. Not only did you hear about that in a hypothetical sense, but you heard from specific doctors called by the defense who were presented with such a request and said no and walked away. Because they believe and acted in accordance with their belief that a doctor has an obligation, a solemn obligation, to first do no harm to their patient. Conrad Murray violated that sacred trust each and every day. Each and every day, Conrad Murray violated that sacred trust premised on that hallowed relationship between a doctor and a patient. It was an employer-employee relationship. Conrad Murray sought payment for services rendered. Services rendered being the provision of propofol to Michael Jackson in his bedroom on an almost nightly basis for over 2 months, according to Conrad Murray's own words. For services rendered, not for proper medical care, not for the sake of doing no harm, but an employee-employer relationship for services rendered. This relationship of trust that is so important between a doctor and a patient was grossly corrupted by the actions of Conrad Murray. Michael Jackson trusted Conrad Murray. He trusted him with his life. He trusted him with his own individual life and the future lives of his children, trusting that Conrad Murray, as Michael slept, would care for him so that in the morning he would awake to share a meal with his children. But Conrad Murray corrupted that relationship, and for that, Michael Jackson paid with his life. We know that on June 24th, 2009, Michael Jackson performed at the Staples Center and by all accounts gave a great performance. He was optimistic, he was looking toward the future, and you've seen live footage of him dancing and singing and performing and doing what he loved to do. We know from the date this image was taken on June 24, 2009, that in about 12 short hours